The Great Return by Arthur Machen. Chapter 1. The Rumor of the Marvellous. There are strange things lost and forgotten in obscure corners of the newspaper. I often think that the most extraordinary item of intelligence that I have read in print appeared a few years ago in the London press. It came from a well-known and most respected news agency. I imagine it was in all the papers. It was astounding. The circumstances necessary, not to the understanding of this paragraph, for that is out of the question, but, we will say, to the understanding of the events which made it possible, are these. We had invaded Tibet, and there had been trouble in the hierarchy of that country, and a personage known as the Tashi Lama had taken refuge with us in India. He went on pilgrimage from one Buddhist shrine to another, and came at last to the holy mountain of Buddhism, the name of which I have forgotten, and thus the morning paper. His Holiness the Tashi Lama then ascended the mountain and was transfigured. Writer. That was all, and from that day to this, I have never heard a word of explanation or comment on this amazing statement. There was no more, it seemed, to be said. Reuter, apparently, thought he had made his simple statement of the facts of the case, had thereby done his duty, and so it all ended. Nobody, so far as I know, ever wrote to the paper asking what Reuter meant by it, or what the Tashi Lama meant by it. I suppose the fact was that nobody cared tuppence about the matter, and so this strange event, if there were any such event, was exhibited to us for a moment, and the lantern show revolved to other spectacles. This is an extreme instance of the manner in which the marvellous is flashed out to us, and then withdrawn behind its black veils and concealments. But I have known of other cases. Now and again, at intervals of a few years, there appear in the newspapers strange stories of the strange doings of what are technically called poltergeists. Some house, often a lonely farm, is suddenly subjected to an infernal bombardment. Great stones crash through the windows, thunder down the chimneys, impelled by no visible hand. The plates and cups and saucers are whirled from the dresser into the middle of the kitchen. No one can say how or by what agency. Upstairs, the big bedstead and an old chest or two are heard bounding on the floor as if in a mad ballet. Now and then, such doings as these excite a whole neighborhood. Sometimes a London paper sends a man down to make an investigation. He writes half a column of description on the Monday, a couple of paragraphs on the Tuesday, and then returns to town. Nothing has been explained, the matter vanishes away, and nobody cares. The tale trickles for a day or two through the press, and then instantly disappears, like an Australian stream, into the bowels of darkness. It is possible, I suppose, that this singular incuriousness as to marvellous events and reports is not wholly unaccountable. It may be that the events in question are, as it were, psychic accidents and misadventures. They are not meant to happen, or rather, to be manifested. They belong to the world on the other side of the dark curtain, and it is only by some queer mischance that a corner of that curtain is twitched aside for an instant. Then, for an instant, we see. But the personages of whom Mr. Kipling calls the Lords of Life and Death take care that we do not see too much. Our business is with things higher and things lower, with things different, anyhow. And on the whole, we are not suffered to distract ourselves with that which does not really concern us. The transfiguration of the Lama and the tricks of the poltergeist are evidently no affairs of ours. We raise an uninterested eyebrow and pass on, to poetry or to statistics. Be it noted, I am not professing any fervent personal belief in the reports to which I have alluded. For all I know, the Lama, in spite of Reuter, was not transfigured, and the poltergeist, in spite of the late Mr. Andrew Lang, may in reality be only mischievous Polly, the servant girl at the farm. And to go farther, I do not know that I should be justified in putting either of these cases of the marvellous in line with the chance paragraph that caught my eye last summer, for this had not, on the face of it at all events, anything wildly out of the common. Indeed, I dare say that I should not have read it, should not have seen it, if it had not contained the name of a place which I had once visited, which had then moved me in an odd manner that I could not understand. Indeed, I am sure that this particular paragraph deserves to stand alone, for even if the poltergeist be a real poltergeist, it merely reveals the psychic whimsicality of some region that is not our region. There were better things, and more relevant things, behind the few lines dealing with Llantrisant, the little town by the sea in Arfenshire. Not on the surface, I must say, for the cutting, I have preserved it, reads as follows. Llantrisant. The season promises very favorably. Temperature of the sea yesterday at noon, 65 degrees. Remarkable occurrences are supposed to have taken place at the recent revival. The lights have not been observed lately. The Crown, the Fisherman's Rest. The style was odd, certainly. Knowing a little of newspapers, I could see that the figure called, I think, tmesis, or cutting, had been generously employed. The exuberances of the local correspondent had been pruned by a Fleet Street expert. And these poor men are often hurried. But what did those lights mean? What strange matters had the vehement blue pencil blotted out and brought to naught? That was my first thought, and then, thinking still of Llantrisant, and how I had first discovered it and found it strange, I read the paragraph again, and was saddened almost to see, as I thought, the obvious explanation. I had forgotten for the moment that it was wartime, that scares and rumors and terrors about traitorous signals and flashing lights were current everywhere by land and sea. Someone, no doubt, had been watching innocent farmhouse windows and thoughtless fanlights of lodging-houses. These were the lights that had not been observed lately. I found out afterwards that the Llantrisant correspondent had no such treasonous lights in his mind, but something very different. Still, what do we know? He may have been mistaken. The great rose of fire that came over the deep may have been the port light of a coasting ship. Did it shine at last from the old chapel on the headland? Possibly, or possibly it was the doctor's lamp at Sarnau, some miles away. I have had wonderful opportunities lately of analyzing the marvels of lying, conscious and unconscious, and indeed, almost incredible feats in this way can be performed. If I incline to the less likely explanation of the lights at Llantrisant, it is merely because this explanation seems to me to be altogether congruous with the remarkable occurrences of the newspaper paragraph. After all, if rumor and gossip and hearsay are crazy things to be utterly neglected and laid aside, on the other hand, evidence is evidence, and when a couple of reputable surgeons assert, as they do assert in the case of Alwyn Phillips, Croswyn, Llantrisant, that there has been a kind of resurrection of the body, it is merely foolish to say that these things don't happen. The girl was a mass of tuberculosis. She was within a few hours of death. She is now full of life. And so, I do not believe that the rose of fire was merely a ship's light, magnified and transformed by dreaming Welsh sailors. But now I am going forward too fast. I have not dated the paragraph, so I cannot give the exact day of its appearance, but I think it was somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd week of June. I cut it out partly because it was about Llantrisant, partly because of the remarkable occurrences. I have an appetite for these matters, though I also have this misfortune that I require evidence before I am ready to credit them, and I have a sort of lingering hope that some day I shall be able to elaborate some scheme or theory of such things. But in the meantime, as a temporary measure, I hold what I call the doctrine of the jigsaw puzzle. That is, this remarkable occurrence, and that and the other, may be, and usually are, of no significance. Coincidence and chance and unsearchable causes will now and again make clouds that are undeniably fiery dragons, and potatoes that resemble eminent statesmen exactly and minutely in every feature. and rocks that are like eagles and lions. All this is nothing. It is when you get your set of odd shapes and find that they fit into one another, and at last that they are but parts of a large design, it is then that research grows interesting and indeed amazing. It is then that one queer form confirms the other, that the whole plan displayed justifies, corroborates, explains each separate piece. So it was within a week or 10 days after I had read the paragraph about Interessant and had cut it out that I got a letter from a friend who was taking an early holiday in those regions. "You'll be interested," he wrote, "to hear that they have taken to ritualistic practices at Interessant. I went into the church the other day, and instead of smelling like a damp vault as usual, it was positively reeking with incense." I knew better than that. The old parson was a firm evangelical. He would rather have burnt sulphur in his church than incense any day. So I could not make out this report at all, and went down to Arfan a few weeks later, determined to investigate this and any other remarkable occurrence at Interessant.